Yes. Today begins a new order. Your lands, your possessions, your very lives will gladly be given in tribute to me. In return for your obedience, you will enjoy my generous protection. In other words, you will be allowed to live.
Yeah. Freedom's been overthrown by skull and bone scrolling key lunatics, upside down crucifix on they rosary. It's the home of the brave land of the supposed free and trilateral commission expeditions overseas. Opposing me's a socially accepted secret known to me. The Jason group mistakes the truth as its golden fleece. Am I supposed to believe Masons who have a mixture of Satan and Catholic scripture trading some gas to Hitler? Should I believe when your forefathers Jack the Ripper and you worship statues in the...
Friends, family, countrymen, lend me your ears. This is Tim with another episode of America the Battlefield. Today we're going to be talking about the Hegelian Dialectic of political conflict resolution. What that is, its methodologies, how it's been used throughout history to manipulate a gullible public into submission to tyranny and other forms of usurpations of their rights. Before we get into that, I wanted to inform my longtime readers and my new viewers that I now have my domain name, americathebattlefield.com. So now when you click on that, it goes here to my website where I post links to all my videos and all my content with links to where you can find me. Also, I changed the quote on my website, which had been there since 2012, to a new one. It was a suggestion by a friend because the one I had before, I guess, no longer applied to the Great Awakening. For those who fell in love with the truth and resisted the darkness, awakening is truly a gift. Once awake, we learn that we have always had the answers right in front of us. We've always had more than we know, but we had to regain our sight first before things started falling into place. Before things started to make a little more sense. That was a quote by Ryan Zem. He's a filmmaker. He produced that 5-hour documentary that some of you may have seen, The Lost History of the Flat Earth, that went into Tartaria in the Old World, and the mud floods and the Great Reset. He sent me a hard copy of that on DVD because the ones that had been posted online had kept getting taken down and redacted and censored. He sent me a DVD copy about a year or two ago, and he signed it. And if you haven't watched that, please do. I'll put a link in the description. It's an amazing deep dive into the Great Reset and how the old world was swept away for a new one and how they tried to cover up the history of our past and the advanced technology that they had, which actually Nikola Tesla rediscovered. You can also find all my videos on Rumble. I promote Rumble more than YouTube, because YouTube censored some of my videos. One of them they restored after I challenged the decision. But Rumble, the free speech platform, I'm pretty much only promoting them, and I'm trying to get the YouTube viewers to come on over to Rumble to support them and the work they're doing, supporting investigative journalists, free thinkers, and our work. So yeah, get your friends to move over from YouTube, create a Rumble account so that you can boost our algorithms and like our videos and subscribe to them. This was a video that I uploaded a couple days ago. It's gaining a little bit of steam. It's a music video called This Is Why We Fight. You may have seen it.
No, it's never gonna be the right time. You're never gonna be the right kind. It's never gonna be enough. This is our time. This is our dimension. All your good intentions don't mean nothing now. This is why we fight. This is our redemption. Every wasted lesson taught me how to fly. This is our time.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
This is our time. This is our dimension. All your good intentions don't mean nothing now. This is why we fight.
It's pretty motivational. I've received a lot of positive feedback from it. Let me know what you think. You can also find us on Patreon. If you want to buy me a coffee or a beer, that's up to you. It's always great to put our money where our mouth is and to support the people that we benefit from, because this is a labor of love. The opening song from this video was Diabolic's The Truth Part 2. You may or may not have heard this song before. He's an old school underground rapper. I first heard this probably 10 to 12 years ago. And The Truth Part 1, he dealt with the 9/11 false flag and the people involved. I hope you check that out. I'll put a link to this also in the description. Let me know what you think of this song. The lyrics are great. All right, now that we got that housekeeping out of the way, back to my show notes on this particular subject. The Hegelian Dialectic of Political Conflict Resolution. What is it? Some of you may have heard it, maybe not in depth. You may have touched upon it once or twice in the past. Thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. Problem, reaction, solution. The Hegelian dialectic is a philosophical framework developed by German philosopher George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, which describes a process of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, problem, reaction, solution. Ostensibly, it suggests that ideas or concepts evolve through a series of debates and contradictions, ultimately leading to a higher, more comprehensive understanding. The Hegelian dialectic is the method of political conflict resolution that the elite employs against a gullible public to manipulate them into compliance with tyranny or other usurpations. Here's a few links to some Facebook posts that I made in the past that I rediscovered and thought were a little interesting. Let's check these out. It's so important that we all acknowledge and understand this methodology, the Hegelian dialectic of political conflict resolution, an ancient developmental concept which relies on a contradictory process between opposing sides. In the modern age, it was named after George Hegel, the 18th century German philosopher and political theorist who developed it into a practical socio-political science. It is effectively employed today by governments around the world to both shape and manage public perception of events and to gain public support for predetermined domestic and foreign policies. I posted some photos that I'm going to read to you from a book. I'm going to be referring to a few books today from my library on this subject to add some context to this. In the words of George Santayana, quote, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it," unquote. That was from the book The Life of Reason, 1905. Also, Sir Winston Churchill worried not so much that those who forget the past are condemned to relive it, lamented that the loss of the past would mean the most thoughtlessness of ages, everyday headlines and short views. We're going to go over this from this book right here. Born in Blood, The Lost Secrets of Freemasonry by John J. Robinson. He was a former Marine. It's an amazing book. He's written a number of books. We're going to go over who he was and what he wrote and how important it is in the context of this subject about the Hegelian dialectic. Here's the next link in this list of posts that I made. Let's make this a little bigger. Oops, I'm sliding across the screen here. The Hegelian dialectic is a threefold polemic of political conflict resolution, comprising three dialectical stages of development: a thesis or problem, giving rise to its antithesis or reaction, which contradicts or negates the thesis, and the tension between the two being resolved by means of a synthesis or a solution. In more simplistic terms, one can consider it thus: problem, reaction, solution, which we've gone over. It is the playbook of revolutionary change, which preys upon the emotional reaction of a terrorized public to influence them into supporting a desired, predetermined political and social agenda. Think about it. Here's some photos that I posted. They're more like memes. Agenda: centralization of power into a thesis, manufactured terrorist threat, into an antithesis, repressive police state, into the final synthesis, the removal of freedoms, transfer of power from the many to the few. We saw that after 9/11 with the passage of the Patriot Act, which eviscerated the Bill of Rights. And they used 9/11 as a terrorizing pretext to make the public, to manipulate them into supporting draconian legislation that robbed them of their rights in exchange for the perception of liberty or safety from their perceived authority figures. Hegelian dialectic: the synthetic solution to these conflicts can't be introduced unless those being manipulated take a side that will advance the predetermined agenda. Here's a quote from Hermann Göring, Hitler's Reich Marshal at the Nuremberg trials after World War II. See if we can make this bigger. Naturally, the common people don't want war, but after all, it is the leaders of a country who determine the policy, and it is always a simple matter to drag the public along, whether it is a democracy or a fascist dictatorship, or a parliament, or a communist dictatorship. Voice or no voice, the people can always be brought to the bidding of the leaders. This is easy. All you have to do is tell them they are being attacked and denounce the pacifists for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. It works the same in every country. Very interesting. Here's a funny meme we've all seen. False flag, a horrific staged event blamed on a political enemy and used as a pretext to start a war or enact draconian laws in the name of national security. 9/11 launched the so-called war on terror, which was in essence a war of terror. We also saw it after the bombing of the Oklahoma City Federal Building in Oklahoma City, 1994, was it? They rammed through, what was the legislation they passed during the Clinton administration? It was like anti-gun laws. And it was all aimed at American patriotic groups and conservatives. Let's go back to our show notes. Here's the third link. Facebook's slow today. Get your act together, Zuckerberg. Hegelian dialectic: get paid to create the problem, then get paid to sell the cure. This was in 2023. Moderna begins trialing mRNA shot that is injected directly into the heart to treat heart attack patients. We all saw the Died Suddenly series of documentaries where they showed people getting myocarditis and collapsing on stage and dying after they got the vaccinations. This video is probably going to be censored just for this alone. But oh well, we press on. We adapt, improvise, and overcome, just like the Marine Corps taught me. Here's the fourth one. It's called the Hegelian Dialectic, the crisis creation playbook of political conflict resolution to manufacture consent for predetermined conflicts. Works every time, especially when the public is ignorant of this well-established methodology. In the present US-Iran crisis, they supposedly provide official proof of nefarious intent. They can be seen to justify escalatory US actions that might previously have appeared unreasonable and provocative. They place pressure on reluctant allies to fall in behind the advancing American columns. Most of all, since democratic consent apparently still counts for something, they are intended to rally public support. This is an article from The Guardian. Back in the day, Iran crisis was created in Washington and the US must be talked down. Yeah, it all goes back to the same philosophy. A lot of us have heard of that metaphor of the red ants and the black ants in a jar. It envisions a jar full of red and black ants, If it's laying on a table and still and undisturbed, the red and black ants will get along. They'll commingle, they'll coexist. However, when someone picks up that jar and shakes it up, they get rattled and upset, and then they turn on whoever their perceived enemy is. Whether it's the black ants turning on the red ants turning on the black ants. Meanwhile, the ants in the jar have no idea who's shaking the jar from the outside. That's the true enemy, the manufacturer of the crisis. Here is the esoteric explanation of the dialectic. We've all heard the terms esoteric and exoteric. Esoteric is always the true meaning, the meaning behind the meaning. The exoteric is the one for the public, or the sheeple factor. It's like the false narrative to explain the hidden truth behind it. Thesis problem, they manufacture a crisis. Antithesis, reaction. They create a counter-revolutionary force that opposes the crisis. Synthesis or solution. Rubbing those first two against each other creates friction, a climate of chaos which produces the desired result, like the ants in the jar metaphor. Or is it an allegory? Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. Thank you. A crisis creates change, but a controlled crisis creates the desired change. Remember, the manufacturers of the crisis never want the crisis to get out of hand or to be uncontrolled. That's why they're always steering it or guiding it. We saw that on J6 when they had dozens of federal agents and the intelligence community embedded within the protesters to cause chaos, to exacerbate the crisis. We saw that with Ray Epps wearing a MAGA hat, the federal employee who was like, we're going to go into the Capitol. He was trying to incite violence so that they could then blame it on their political enemies, infiltrated from within. The manufacturers of the crisis and the counter crisis then pose as the saviors of the people and produce a solution to the crisis they created from their two opposing doctrines, while demanding in return the rights and independence of the people in exchange for protection. And they are long-range planners. They're always creating new enemies and crises to fight in the future, the moment another fails. Here is the ostensible, officially accepted exoteric explanation of the Hegelian dialectic. This is like the Wikipedia version. Thesis, this is the initial idea or proposition that is presented. Antithesis, this is the opposing idea or force that challenges the thesis, creating a conflict. Synthesis, this is the resolution of the conflict between the thesis and antithesis, resulting in a new, more complete understanding that integrates aspects of both. In simpler terms, imagine a debate or a discussion where two opposing viewpoints clash. The Hegelian dialectic suggests that through this clash of ideas, a new and more nuanced understanding can emerge that incorporates elements of both original perspectives. That's the intellectual viewpoint of the Hegelian dialectic. George Friedrich Hegel. Let's see who this guy is. He's not much to look at. Move out of here a little. George Friedrich Hegel was a 19th century German idealist. His influence extends across a wide range of topics from metaphysical issues to epistemology and ontology, to political philosophy and the philosophy of art and religion. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. Let's take it. Whoa, wow. There's a photo in here I want to highlight for y'all. I guess that's his signature. Wow. No wonder he wore a wig. Guess that's his gravestone. Check this out right here. Those of you who have been studying conspiracies for a long time recognize this symbol. It's the Owl of Minerva, an ancient symbol of the intellectual elite. It symbolizes seeing in the dark that which is occulted or concealed or veiled. This is the symbol of the Bohemian Club, the Bohemian Grove in California. The Alex Jones blew out of the water back in the day and exposed with a hidden camera. He filmed their cremation of care ritual out in the woods, the Grove of Osiris. What I noticed today seeing this was if you turn this photo 90 degrees counterclockwise, it looks like AOL to me, like America Online. Let me know what you think of that. It could be a Masonic compass. This could be the time circle, the compass, and the square, the keys to time and space. Let me know what you think of this. Is it AOL or am I reading into it too much? Back to my notes on this subject. Helps to keep me focused. This is a quote from Hegel. The state is the absolute reality, and the individual himself has objective existence, truth and morality only in his capacity as a member of the state. Notice that the word state is capitalized. All right, this brings us to John J. Robinson, the author of Born in Blood. We're going to read a little bit of that too. Let's take a look at him. He's a real interesting guy. John J. Robinson was an American author, best known as the author of Born in Blood, The Lost Secrets of Freemasonry. He is also credited as being the founding visionary of the Masonic Information Center, run by the Masonic Service Association of North America. He was a member of the Medieval Academy of America, the Organization of American Historians, and the Royal Overseas League of London. The Masonic Sourcebook website has a page on him. It's like a bio. John J. Robinson. He lived from 1918 to 1996. John J. Robinson was that rare breed of writer who was not a Mason when he began producing his books, but became captivated by the fraternity while doing his work and entered a Masonic lodge late in life. I'm going to make this a little bigger for you. Don't read into that. His 1989 book, Born in Blood, was the best-selling work on the subject of Freemasonry for 20 years. His last book, A Pilgrim's Path, touched many Masons with its insightful and resonant observations about the craft. John came to this work after a long life in which he had been a business executive, farmer, and member of the U.S. Marines. Semper Fi, John. His abiding interest in the history of medieval Britain and the Crusades not only spurred his research into those realms, but led to his becoming the head of a family trust dedicated to historical study. Through chance occurrence, his work caused him to become enmeshed with Freemasonry and the Knights Templar. This is cool. Born in Blood. While exploring a curious event known as the Peasants' Revolt of 1381, John discovered references to a great society that was secretly directing the course of the revolt. As he probed into it further, he began to discover numerous connections between this secretive society and the Knights Templar that had been disbanded 69 years earlier amid men being burned at the stake. I did an entire podcast on that. I'll put a link to that in the description. It's pretty interesting. Curiously enough, some of those connections also applied to the Society of Freemasons that would emerge from behind a veil of secrecy many years later. For a deeper review of Born in Blood, see the accompanying article here. I have this book too. It's amazing. But we're going to get into this one. I want to read some excerpts because it adds a lot of context to this. He discovered numerous connections between the secretive society of the Knights Templar that were guiding the Peasants' Revolt from the top down. It wasn't organic from the grassroots level. Okay, cool. So I have an auxiliary camera here. I'll be reading some excerpts from this book, John J. Robinson's Born in Blood, The Lost Secrets of Freemasonry. Let's read the description. Its mysterious symbols and rituals had been used in secret for centuries before Freemasonry revealed itself in London in 1717. Once known, Freemasonry spread throughout the world and attracted kings, emperors, and statesmen to take its sacred oaths. It also attracted great revolutionaries such as George Washington and Sam Houston in America, Juarez in Mexico, Garibaldi in Italy, and Bolivar in South America. It was outlawed over the centuries by Hitler, Mussolini, and the Ayatollah Khomeini. But where had this powerful organization come from? What was it doing in those secret centuries before it rose from underground for more than 270 years ago? And why was Freemasonry attacked with such intense hatred by the Roman Catholic Church? This amazing detective story answers those questions and proves that the Knights Templar in Britain, fleeing arrest and torture by Pope and King, that was Pope Clement V and King Philip IV of France, formed a secret society of mutual protection that came to be called Freemasonry. Based on years of meticulous research, this book solves the last remaining mysteries of the Masons, their secret words, symbols, and allegories, whose true meanings had been lost to antiquity. With a richly drawn background of the bloody battles, the opportunistic kings and scheming popes, the tortures, and the religious persecution that were the Middle Ages, it is an important book that may require that we take a new look at the history of events leading to the Protestant Reformation. John J. Robinson is a writer with special interest in the history of medieval Britain and the Crusades. He heads a family trust dedicated to historical research and publication. A business executive, sheep farmer, and ex-Marine, Mr. Robinson is also a member of the Medieval Academy of America, the Organization of American Historians, and the Royal Overseas League of London. He lives in Carroll County, Kentucky. So I marked this page. It's funny. I always keep vocabulary words in books I'm reading of words I am unfamiliar with to look up later. I recommend you all do the same. Chapter 4, first and above all, the destruction of the Hospitallers. That was an order of the Roman Church that was in opposition to the Knights Templar. It all smacks of stagecraft and at the highest levels. All right, okay. I want to start here, and I hope you bear with me because I think this is really important in the context of the Hegelian dialectic. The overriding mystery of the Peasants' Revolt of 1381, of course, is the organization that lay behind it. Most historians now agree that there was indeed organization and planning over a wide area of England, but none has cared to speculate on just what the source of that organization could have been. Was it marshaled just for the rebellion, or had it existed for some time before 1381? Did it stop at the end of the rebellion, or was there some residual or ongoing association that might have had a bearing on religious and political disturbances in Britain over the years ahead? Was it one organization, or simply an informal, once-in-a-lifetime communication among hastily assembled groups? Consider this item from a royal letter of July 23, 1381, to the sheriffs and bailiffs of an administrative unit of the county of Cheshire called the Hundred of Wirral, over 150 miles from London. From the evidence of trustworthy men, we have learnt that several of the villains of our beloved in Christ, the Abbot of Chester, have made certain assemblies within the area of your jurisdiction, and they have gathered in secret confederacies within the woods and other hidden places in the said hundred, the Hundred of Wirral. They have held secret councils there contrary to our recent proclamation on the subject. Even in such a relatively remote local area, such secret confederacies would require planning. Someone has to select a meeting place. Word must go out in total secrecy, notifying those attending of time and place of the meeting. Screening must be carried out to determine who may be trusted, because anyone attending could inform on a whole group. Each man is trusting the others with his life and property. Care must be taken for the participants to approach the meeting by various routes to avoid suspicion. Cover stories must be invented to be employed by families and neighbors in the event that suspicion is aroused by a number of absences at one time. Sentries or guards must be posted to alert the group to the approach not only of authorities, but of anyone who might subsequently yield to the innocent temptation to tell others of the odd circumstance of coming upon an assembly of men in the deep woods, like the Bohemian Grove. Someone must set the agenda for the meeting and decide alone or with one or two other leaders, by definition, a conspiracy, that the matter at hand is important enough to run the risk of a meeting. It is obvious that to organize and operate a secret society in just one section of a remote rural area would require organization, planning, and discipline. Now expand those requirements to a national or regional level, and one can begin to appreciate the vast amount of planning and ingenuity necessary to implement even a working system of communication. Who initiates the communication? Who delivers it? If all delivery was made on foot, it would take forever. On the other hand, if on horseback, we are not looking at a peasant society after all. That reminds me of the story of Sir Adam Weishaupt, the Jesuit priest whose parcel rider was struck by lightning in an act of God while transporting secret documents from their Illuminati secret society, which bore the all-seeing eye of providence on the cover. It was discovered when he was hit by lightning in transit with those secret papers by the Bavarian government and seized. That's the only way we know that they existed. An actual act of God. Next, I want to read an excerpt out of William Cooper's book, Behold a Pale Horse. William Cooper, as I've stated before, was my Morpheus. He pulled me out of the matrix, gave me the truth, and then gave me a choice. The choice that Neo is given, free will or enslavement. He taught me how to think. He taught me how to process information. He said, read everything, listen to everyone, and believe nothing until you can prove it in your own research. So I took his advice. It forever changed the way I process information and do research. This is the cover of his book. I'm going to read an excerpt out of chapter 2. The reason he put silent weapons for quiet wars as this chapter was, in his words, to shock the reader out of their trance. The Illuminati's declaration of war upon the people of America. William Cooper, author's note. I read top secret documents while he was in the Office of Naval Intelligence, which explained that silent weapons for quiet wars is the doctrine adopted by the Policy Committee of the Bilderberg Group during its first known meeting in 1954. A copy found in 1969 was in the possession of Naval Intelligence. The following document, dated May 1979, was found on July 7, 1986, in an IBM copier that had been purchased at a surplus sale. Another act of God. Top secret silent weapons for quiet wars, an introductory programming manual, operations research technical manual. We're going to read from, oh, here's something interesting. He used to quote this all the time on his show back in the day. In 1954, this was the issue of primary concern, although these so-called moral issues were raised. In view of the law of natural selection, it was agreed that a nation or world of people who will not use their intelligence are no better than animals who do not have intelligence. Such people are beasts of burden and stakes on the table by choice and consent.
There's some of you out there just like me, but most of you are just exactly what I've just described. Most people are no better than animals who do not have intelligence because they don't use their intelligence. And to these men who control things behind the scenes, you are stakes on the table by choice and consent, and will always be ruled and manipulated and enslaved by people who do use their brains.
We're going to read from a section here from Diversion, the Primary Strategy. Experience has proven that the simplest method of securing a silent weapon and gaining control of the public is to keep the public undisciplined and ignorant of basic systems principles. On the one hand, while keeping them confused, disorganized, and distracted with matters of no real importance on the other hand. This is achieved by disengaging their minds, sabotaging their mental activities, providing a low-quality program of public education in mathematics, logic, systems design, and economics, and discouraging technical creativity. We've seen it in the public education system at the federal level, which really doesn't produce intelligent students who are ready for adulthood. It produces worker drones who are really good at repeating what they're told to believe and just being good little workers and producers. Part two, this is achieved by engaging their emotions, increasing their self indulgence and their indulgence in emotional and physical activities by unrelenting emotional affrontations and attacks, mental and emotional rape, by way of constant barrage of sex, violence, and wars in the media, especially the TV and newspapers, giving them what they desire and excess junk food for thought, and depriving them of what they really need. Part three. This is achieved by rewriting history and law and subjecting the public to the deviant creation, thus being able to shift their thinking from personal needs to highly fabricated outside priorities. These preclude their interest in the discovery of the silent weapons of social automation technology. The general rule is that there is profit in confusion. The more confusion, the more profit. Therefore, the best approach is to create problems and then offer the solutions. The Hegelian Dialectic. Problem, reaction, solution. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Here's the summary of the diversion, the primary strategy. Media, keep the adult public attention diverted away from the real social issues and captivated by matters of no real importance. We see that in entertainment, reality shows and game shows, TV shows, movies, like summer blockbusters. Schools, keep the young public ignorant of real mathematics, real economics, real law, and real history. They took that away from us. They took away our legacy of our real history. I was talking to a friend of mine today, Charles. We were talking about how if we have no history, we don't know where we come from, we don't know who we are, we don't know the true nature of our realm or reality, we don't have any identity. And therefore, there's nothing worth fighting for. And so we're just stuck in this diversion away from real social issues and captivated by matters of no real concern. Entertainment, keep the public entertainment below a sixth grade level. That reminds me of the movie by Mike Judge, Idiocracy. You may or may not have seen it. Please get a copy of it. He lamented later after producing that movie that he didn't really mean for it to become a documentary, but it had become one. Work. Keep the public busy, busy, busy with no time to think, back on the farm with the other animals. That goes back to that quote that Cooper often cited. A nation or world of people who will not use their intelligence are no better than animals who do not have intelligence. Such people are beasts of burden and stakes on the table by choice and consent. Consent to primary victory. A silent weapon system operates upon data obtained from a docile public by legal but not always lawful force. Much information is made available to silent weapon systems programmers through the Internal Revenue Service. Very interesting. This information consists of the enforced delivery of well-organized data contained in federal and state tax forms collected, assembled, and submitted by slave labor provided by taxpayers and employers. By voluntarily submitting tax returns and paying taxes on wages, which they convince us are income. I did a whole podcast on that. You should watch it. Furthermore, the number of such forms submitted to the IRS is a useful indicator of public consent. An important factor in strategic decision-making, other data sources are given in the short list of inputs. Remember, William Cooper was on the forefront of the movement to untax yourself from the federal government. He and Aaron Russo produced a documentary, and they created the Constitution Party back in the day, which is a third party and therefore didn't really gain any steam because we're in a two-party system. And he was constantly attacked by the Clinton administration's IRS for doing that. Consent coefficients, numerical feedback indicating victory status, psychological basis. When the government is able to collect tax and seize private property without just compensation, it is an indication that the public is ripe for surrender and is consenting to enslavement and legal encroachment. A good and easily quantified indicator of harvest time is the number of public citizens who pay income tax despite an obvious lack of reciprocal or honest service from the government.
There's only so much I can take. Here's the truth. We the people have been seeing your attempts and realize we the ones you declared war against. Here's the truth. I refuse to have you controlling me with my faith in a bunch of snakes. I just don't believe. Here's the truth. We the people.
That's why I titled this video what I did. The Hegelian Dialectic of Political Conflict Resolution. All revolutions are manufactured crises. And the Peasants' Revolt of 1381, in which the secret societies were involved in manipulating and guiding, was only one example throughout history. We could take a look at numerous revolutions and uprisings throughout history and backtrack and prove that they were started from the top down and were not organic or grassroots. So we talked about thesis, antithesis, synthesis. They manufacture a crisis, create their counter-revolutionary force that opposes it, rub them two against each other to cause friction and a climate of chaos which produces the desired result. I also had this in my notes on the subject, Skull and Bones documentary with Charlotte Thompson Iserbyt. Some of you may or may not be familiar with her work. She wrote the book, The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America, which proved definitively a paper trail that the government of the United States and the education department set out to specifically dumb down the students by robbing them of what Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars said was important for them to learn and should be held back from them to keep them at an intellectually stunted level. She wrote The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America, which is almost unobtainable now because it's out of print and people are selling it for its collectible value for hundreds of dollars. Kind of like Michelle Marie Moore's book, Oklahoma City Day One, which I've highlighted in a previous podcast, that is now out of print. I bought it for $7.99 14 years ago, and it now sells upwards of $2,500. So Charlotte Thompson Iserbyt was in a Skull and Bones documentary outlining the Hegelian political theory and proofs of the conspiracy by John Robeson. And YouTube has taken down this link. It's no longer available. They always do that with the really important work. Maybe you can find a copy of it somewhere and post it in the comments. I really didn't go looking that hard for a newer one. I want to take us into another way that the Hegelian dialectic has been used in the past and other methodologies, the so-called space race. Robert H. Goddard, the father of rocketry, said the following to H.G. Wells on April 20th, 1932. There can be no thought of finishing, for aiming at the stars, both literally and figuratively, is the work of generations. But no matter how much progress one makes, there is always the thrill of just beginning. H.G. Wells then began work upon his book entitled The New World Order. Here's another cover from that book. In 1938, his cousin Orson Welles tested the Hegelian theorem that an invasion from some other species, from some other planet, could bring the world together under one global government to dissolve national boundaries and bring order out of chaos. This live test of the Hegelian principle of conflict resolution inflicted upon an unsuspecting people was called War of the Worlds. Some of you may have seen the movie with Tom Cruise but not read the book or seen the radio broadcast back in the day. It aired on Halloween, October 30th of 1938 over the CBS radio network. I found a really old copy of this on YouTube. Let's just play the intro. Some of you may remember the intro is spoken by Morgan Freeman in the movie with Tom Cruise.
The Columbia Broadcasting System and its affiliated stations present Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the Air in The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. Ladies and gentlemen, the director of the Mercury Theater and star of these broadcasts, Orson Welles.
We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's, and yet as mortal as his own. We know now that as human beings busied themselves about their various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied, perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. With infinite complacence, people went to and fro over the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design, man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space. Yet across an immense ethereal gulf, minds that are to our minds as ours are to the beasts in the jungle, intellects vast, cool, and unsympathetic, regarded this earth with envious eyes and slowly and surely drew their plans against us. In the 39th year of the 20th century came the Great Disillusionment. It was near the end of October. Business was better. The war scare was over. More men were back at work. Sales were picking up. On this particular evening, October 30th, the Crosley service estimated that 32 million people were listening in on radios.
24 hours, not much change in temperature. A slight atmospheric disturbance of undetermined origin is reported over Nova Scotia. Country to keep an astronomical watch on any...
Seems a safe enough distance. Just a moment, ladies and gentlemen. Someone... More like a huge cylinder. Has a diameter of... end of the thing is beginning to flake off.
We will return to that point at the earliest opportunity.
It's all too evident that these creatures have scientific knowledge far in advance of our own. It's my guess that in some way they are able to generate an intense heat in a chamber of practically absolute non-conductivity.
Another bulletin from Langham Field, Virginia. Scouting planes report enemy machines now 3 in number, increasing speed northward, kicking over houses and trees in their evident haste to...
10 minutes ago.
I'm skipping ahead to give just a brief summary of this radio
Our
drama.
army is wiped out.
Should one of their machines appear over the top of trees, I'm ready to fling myself flat on the earth. Come to a chestnut tree.
Get all the books we can. Science books.
Through all the deep of space, no life existed beyond the petty surface of our minute sphere.
I'll post a link to this in the description. It might be good to listen to this for the first time if you haven't, or again for the second time, because this was the methodology of the elite who were carrying out what Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars talked about and the Hegelian Dialectic, problem, reaction, solution. The public believed this was real. The episode was famous for inciting a panic by falsely convincing some members of the listening audience that a Martian invasion was taking place. And they didn't give the public a disclaimer before broadcasting it. This was a mass public experiment of psychological warfare to test the reaction of the public, to see what they would do. Radio play terrifies nation. There were some stories of farmers who went outside because it broadcast at night in the dark with shotguns, and they were shooting their water towers because they thought like the manipulation was so intense. They forgot that that was their own water tower. They're shooting holes in it because they thought it was some flying saucer or alien UFO. Really messed up. A lot of people got hurt. Some people actually committed suicide, and no one was ever really brought to justice. This is another aspect of the Hegelian dialectic from my notes on this subject. I wrote this, The Cold War was a fraud, in March 13, 2016. I compiled the following information from my own research for someone who asked me if there exists any evidence suggesting that the Cold War was a fraud. What I discovered is that the phony Cold War aggressions were merely a smokescreen to provide the pretext to bankroll the vast military industrial complexes, space programs, and surveillance apparati in both the West and the East, at the expense of the American taxpayer. Wasteful spending programs outlined in the report from Iron Mountain. You should read that book too. I have it in my library. To further erode the prosperity of the bourgeois middle class and to erect the infrastructure and technology of the New World Order, which H.G. Wells titled his book. Adolf Hitler also wrote a book entitled The New World Order, and it's very hard to get a copy of that one. This video will probably be censored just for saying his name. Any Facebook post I ever make with his name or likeness is immediately censored. The United States built the Soviet Union from the ground up during the ostensible American-Soviet aggressions. A lot of the baby boomers may have a hard time with this because it was drilled into them, and with all the bombing raid drills, get under your desk, and all the pictures we've seen of children hiding under their desks, which was the worst kind of psychological manipulation. Not only was the Cold War between the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union a conspiratorial deception and a Hegelian control mechanism of political conflict resolution, but also propounded a false perception that the leaders of these nations were enemies and economic opponents. In fact, the largest truck factory in the world, the Gorky automotive plant, was built on the Kama River in the Nizhny Novgorod, a cooperative enterprise between Ford Motor Company and the Soviet Union, at the height of perceived aggressions between the United States and the USSR. In the agreement, Ford agreed to give technical assistance to the Soviet Union to build and outfit the Gorky plant, which subsequently produced tens of thousands of military vehicles, tanks, and other rolling stock used by the Soviets in multiple theaters of combat, including World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. Not only that, but at the highest levels, the so-called collapse of the Soviet Union and the fall of communism. I believe that was 1989. Remember the guy from Knight Rider, David Hasselhoff, was the MC of that? Like it was some big entertainment event. But at the highest levels, the so-called collapse of the Soviet Union and the fall of communism was a covert restructuring of the Communist Party to export communism to the West under the guise of openness and democracy. Don't worry, we're getting somewhere with this. Mikhail Gorbachev was a Knight Templar, the 13th and highest degree of the York Rite of Freemasonry. He was the founder and president of Green Cross International, a tax-free financing arm for international socialism, much like the Rockefeller Foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Carnegie Endowment, the Clinton Global Initiative, and the Rhodes Trust, to name a few. Gorbachev's foundation was founded at the Presidio, a former U.S. Army base in San Francisco, but has since been moved to Northeastern University in Boston. He's passed away since I wrote this, so these were all in present tense at the time. The word Presidio is from the Spanish presidir, meaning to preside or to oversee. Forgive me, I don't speak Spanish. The logo of Green Cross International is a green cross. It's actually down here. There it is. The logo of Green Cross International is a green cross and a white field, the symbol on the Templar flag first planted in the New World by Cristobal Colum, the birth name of Christopher Columbus, which meant the Christed dove. For those of you who've studied the occult, you'll know what that means. A member of the Knights of Christ, a Templar offshoot brotherhood. Note that he planted the Templar flag upon the shores of the New World before the royal standard of Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain. A lot of people don't know that. This was the flag he planted in the New World before he planted the standard, the royal standard of Spain, of Ferdinand and Isabella, King and Queen of Spain. Green Cross International, Mikhail Gorbachev's organization. Here's their website. It's still in existence, even though he passed away. It was one of those fronts kind of like the World Wildlife Fund, which was funneling money to the royal family under the guise of ecology. Encoded in Gorbachev's book, Perestroika, was an incredible truth hidden in plain view. The perceived fall of the Soviet Union was only a ruse to lull the West into downsizing our armed forces and ultimately disarming amidst a false sense of security, so that they could subvert and destroy us from within. The same concept championed by the former Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev. His name's hard to say. Concurrently, Henry Kissinger's 1967 State Department Memorandum 7277, Freedom from War. I wrote a blog about that years ago. It was one of my first ones. Presented to the United Nations by then President John F. Kennedy, outlined the ongoing disarmament procedure for the US, overseen by the Soviets, as the official policy of the United States government. Perestroika means restructuring. That was the name of his book, Mikhail Gorbachev. The Communist Party of the Soviet Union did not dissolve. It was merely restructured, repackaged, and rebranded under the guise of peace and openness. Glasnost, meaning openness, the Soviet government policy of open discussion of political and social issues instituted by Mikhail Gorbachev in the late 1980s, began the democratization of the Soviet Union. Recall that Soviet Premier and Socialist Revolutionary Vladimir Lenin wrote that democracy is indispensable to socialism. So all those wacky people nowadays saying, you're a threat to democracy. I'm like, good, let's do it. So brainwashed. Democracy is indispensable to socialism, and the goal of socialism is communism. I believe Karl Marx wrote that later. Likewise, the preeminent socialist theoretician, oh, here it is, Karl Marx wrote what history has shown to be true, that the meaning of peace is the absence of opposition to socialism. Now you know what the United Nations peacekeepers are for. All the esteemed logicians and philosophers of these socialist and communist ideologies wrote in their own words that the most effective way to subvert and destroy American independence was to do it from within, under the cover of democratic policies. And we've seen that happen in the last 20 or so years. Thankfully, it's now being walked back, but a lot of damage was done. Khrushchev revealed that very plan while banging his fists on the podium before the United Nations General Assembly in September of 1960. And Joseph Stalin was correct when he wrote the following. America is like a healthy body, and its resistance is threefold. It's patriotism, its morality, and its spiritual life. If we can undermine these three areas, America will collapse from within. That which we saw on the television and read in the government-authorized newspapers and textbooks was the openness part of it all, whereas that which we were not meant to see was kept under the strictest cover of secrecy and obfuscation, behind Truman's veil of the National Security Act, which he brought in right after. All that information went behind the veil of secrecy after that, under the guise of protecting American national secrets. The perceived collapse of the Soviet Union was done under a carefully crafted program of public relations and psychological operations aimed at the American people and the West by extension. Before we go further, if you like the hat I'm wearing, it's my own design. We the people on the front will not comply on the back. It's a great way to make a statement out in public. And I've met some really cool people who are like, that's a cool hat. Where can I get one? And then you have a new friend who is on the same page. So we're going to wrap this episode up with one more excerpt. I've referenced this book before, The Protocols of Zion, but I think it's important to readdress it again in the context of this discussion about the Hegelian Dialectic. It's a very old book. It's hard to find. Protocols of the Wise Men of Zion, the Russian to English language, translated from the Russian to the English language for the information of all true Americans, and to confound enemies of democracy and the Republic. Also to demonstrate the possible fulfillment of biblical prophecy as to world domination by the chosen people. Some of my newer audience weren't privy to that. So let's go ahead and find this again. Bear with me, it's an old book. Here we are, Protocol 1. It should be noted that people with evil instincts are more numerous than those with good ones. Therefore, the best results in governing them are attained by intimidation and violence, and not by academic argument. Every man aims for power. Everyone desires to be a dictator. If possible, moreover, few would not sacrifice the good of others for the attainment of their own ends. What has controlled the wild animal called man? What has ruled him until the present time? At the beginning of social organization, men submitted to brute force. Later, they obeyed the law, which is the same force, only in masked form. Consequently, I draw the conclusion from this that according to the laws of nature, right lies in might. Continuing, politics have nothing in common with morals. The ruler guided by morality is not a politician, and consequently he is not seated firmly on the throne. He who desires to rule must do so by cunning and hypocrisy. The great qualities of the people, honesty and frankness, are essentially vices in politics because they dethrone more surely and more certainly than does the strongest enemy. These qualities are attributes of Gentile rule. We certainly must not be guided by them. Remember to clarify, as William Cooper published in his book, Behold a Pale Horse, for clear understanding, the word Zion should be replaced with Sion, and any reference to Jews should be replaced with the word Illuminati, and the word Goyim should be replaced with the word cattle. And the word Gentile refers to everyone who opposes these methodologies. Our right lies in force. The word right expresses an abstract idea. It has no proof. The word means nothing more than, give me what I want, that I may have the evidence of my superior strength over you. Where does right begin? Where does it end? Any government with poorly organized authority, in which the laws and the ruler are powerless amid the flood of rights ever multiplying out of liberalism, I find that there exists a new right, the right of the stronger to attack and destroy all existing regulations and statutes, to take the law into his own hands, to change all institutions and become the ruler of those who give that right by yielding it voluntarily through their liberalism. With the present instability of all authority, our power will be more unassailable than any other, because it will be invisible until it has gained such strength that no cunning can undermine it. Out of the temporary evil to which we are now forced to resort will emerge the good of a permanent government, the New World Order, which will restore the orderly functioning of the mechanism of people's existence, now shaken by liberalism. The result will justify the means. In laying our plans, we must turn our attention not so much to the good and the moral as to the necessary and the useful. Before us lies a project embodying a strategical line of action, from which we must not diverge if we are to avoid the risk of a collapse of the work of many centuries. That would be the great work of the Illuminati. I hope you can acknowledge and understand the dots that I'm trying to connect here. They're all interconnected and interwoven. Civilization cannot exist without absolute despotism, exercised not by the masses, but by their leader, no matter who he may be. The barbarous crowd shows its barbarism on every occasion. When the mob grasps liberty in its hands, it soon changes it into anarchy, which is in itself the highest degree of barbarism. Our password is force and hypocrisy, for only force can conquer in the realm of politics. especially if it is concealed in the talents essential to statesmen. Violence must be the principle, hypocrisy and cunning the rule of governments which do not wish to lose their power. This evil is the sole means of reaching the goal of good. For this reason, we must not hesitate at bribery, deceit, and treachery, when these can help us to achieve our end. In the field of politics, it is necessary to take the property of others without hesitation, if by that means we secure submission and authority. Just but merciless severity is the greatest factor in the strength of government. We must follow a program of violence and hypocrisy, not only for the sake of gain, but also as a duty and for the sake of victory. The doctrine of self-interest is as potent as are the methods employed by it. Consequently, we shall triumph, not so much by the methods employed, as by the doctrine of severity, and shall subjugate all the governments to our super-government. It is sufficient for all to know that we are inexorable, and disobedience will cease. Wrapping up with the Protocols of Zion, the last page of Protocol 1, the basic doctrine. Our triumph has also been made easier because in our relations with the people necessary to us, we have always played upon the most sensitive strings of the human mind, on calculation, greed, and the insatiable material desires of men. Each of these human weaknesses, taken separately, is capable of paralyzing initiative and of placing the will of the people at the disposal of the purchaser of their activities. The abstract conception of liberty made it possible for us to convince the crowd that government is only the management for the owner of the country. The people and that steward can be changed like a pair of worn-out gloves. The possibility of changing the representatives of the people has placed them at our disposal, and as it were, has placed them in our power as creatures of our purposes. So yeah, that's a crash course in the Hegelian Dialectic. Political conflict resolution. Diversion is the primary strategy, and all wars are waged by deception. They prey on the public fears, exacerbate the crisis, and then swoop in and pose as the saviors of the crisis they initiated. And what's sad is that people just forget the bellwethers of history and forget about these methodologies, and they're just basically ignorant of the way it's used to manipulate the public into supporting their own enslavement. So let's all just stop falling for it from now on. If you get something beneficial from this content, please like it, subscribe to it, and share it on with your friends and family who you think will benefit from it also. Stay tuned. There's a lot coming. I have a lot of really good stuff in the works, and a lot of really good people have reached out to me to collaborate. So buckle up. You're in for a wild ride. This is Tim with America the Battlefield. Until next time.
You controlling me with my faith in a bunch of snakes. I just don't believe.